Thank you so much. So today we're going to be talking about managing the process, and it's one of those things I think that we don't talk about enough in our industry. Whether you're a web designer, a web developer, a project manager, a business owner, we don't talk about the process side of what we do, except for when it comes to like a specific type of piece of code or something, or a specific type of thing we're trying to learn how to do in Sketch or Photoshop. But we don't talk about it. We don't talk about it because usually we're fearful to let other people know our ideas. We also don't talk about it because usually we're not sure if we're right. We get afraid about that. We get scared about that. So what we're going to do today is actually look at some different things about process, why it's important for us to talk about it, why it's important for you to actually write things down and define your process rather than just keeping it in your head, and also talk about some steps to take after this. After this presentation, where do you go from here? How do you keep evolving this? So the first thing I want to know is who everyone really is. What's the makeup right now of the crowd? So how many folks are developer or designer? Or you develop or design, even if you own the business? Okay. How many folks are like a manager or a team lead? All right. And how many folks are a student or teacher? Cool. And how many are just like a one-person shop? Okay, cool. Very good. Okay, cool. So a little bit about me, just so you know. I started out the same way, designer, developer, then progressed into being a project manager, then progressed into being like a COO type person at different digital agencies in New York. And what we really was quickly understanding was that no matter where I went to, Chopping Block, we did things like Dave Matthews Band and They Might Be Giants, Cuban Council, most known for things like Facebook logo, things like that. Barbarian Group, known for the Subservient Chicken, and then School of Visual Arts in New York City, with a bunch of great other faculty there. No matter where I went, though, what I kept realizing over and over again was that no one really had defined their process over and over. From these great agencies, these great places that we look to for inspiration. I remember looking at Chopping Block's website. They had this whole like, oranges in graphic design. That was the actual like song that was made for them by They Might Be Giants. And I remember looking at their site in like 1999 maybe or something and thinking, wow, like these guys are amazing. And then I got there and I realized that we had a loose process, but we really had to keep defining it. We had to keep evolving it. And it was something that really kind of stuck out to me as I went out to other places, that this really wasn't happening. So we've created for ourselves, we were Mark and Phil, focusing on nonprofits. We've actually evolved into what's called Digital Empire now. This is in the past 6 months. So it's really a focus on doing things like mobile apps, web apps. So I'm probably in the same boat as most of you in here. So I do this for a living. I don't speak about process for a living. I'm just sharing with you what I've kind of seen and picked up from different places. So what's the problem? What's the real issue at hand? Why are we having such problems when it comes to the process? Well, it looks kind of like this. And it says creative, but imagine if you're a coder, it's the same issues. That, we get this great project, the money comes in, you get the first check, you get all excited, and you're like, this is going to be great. And you go out and get yourself an Xbox and whatever else. And then, you're like, I got plenty of time to get this done. And it might be procrastination. It might be that you just need to think about it for a while and think of what the solution's going to be. It might be that, you think it needs time. Like, you shouldn't get it done too quick because the client's gonna think they can get away with anything if you do it really quickly for them. But the reality is we go through this. We all go through the same thing. So we just kind of fuck off for a while, then we get into panic mode, and then we actually try to do all the work while we're freaking out and crying about it. That's the 3 a.m. heat on your neck. You're like, oh, crap, I can't do this. And then 10 minutes later, you're like, oh, I can do this. This is cool. That's fine. And then the deadline of actually getting things done. This is obviously the wrong way. This is the way that causes us trouble. This is the way that literally makes us stress out all the time and sad. Another way to put it is like this, and this is something that I think a lot of project managers, team leads will sympathize with in here. We start out where the customer is explaining that they want a three-seated slide. But if you go all the way through it and read each one of these little ones, everyone sees it a little bit differently. Marketing sees it as like an eye swing. The business consultant sees it as a little like a loafa chair, just swinging in the wind. But the reality is all they wanted was a tire swing, and the client just didn't explain it enough, or we didn't ask enough questions to get that out of them. So again, another really good example of why this is an actual problem. So what happens is, usually this is a tendency from when we're a small shop, whether it's one person or whether it's like a few people, under 50 basically, and we're evolving to something greater. When we're trying to literally, get the kinds of clients we've wanted, get the kinds of budgets we wanted, we're looking to evolve ourselves. We're looking to evolve the business. And that's where this friction always seems to happen. So when you're small, a process can live in your head. You have no problems. I can literally turn to the guy next to me and say, hey, Mario, this is how you do this thing. Here's my screen. Here's this widget. This is how you move it. Save it, put it up on the Git, and we're all good, and deploy it. But the problem is, if you're running the business, if you're running the team, once you start growing, you cannot keep that process in your head. You can't keep doing this. You can't keep literally sitting down with individual people to show them how to do these things. First off, you won't get anything done. It'll interfere with the rest of your day. But also, you won't be able to focus on growing the actual team, getting the right members, getting the right projects that you want to have. So why follow a process? What do you think? I'll take some answers. What do you think? Why follow a process? What was that? Reproducible. Sure. Yep. Consistency. Keep it consistent. What was that? One more time. Oh, manage your people? Yep. There was one more. Manager? Measure. Yep, to keep measurements. Yeah, so you guys are actually pretty close. Define the roles of your team so everyone knows exactly what they're doing. If we're setting down the process, if we're actually saying, okay, these front-end developers are going to do this back-end developer will do this person's going to be the scrum master, this person's going to be the client liaison. We're giving people specific roles that they know they can fulfill. How many times have you been given a project by someone, a supervisor, a team lead, a manager, you're the owner of your company, and they just say, hey, I want you to make this really awesome website or mobile app, and it's got to look cool, and it's got to be fun, and we just want it to really show off the brand. Can you do anything with that? Can you make anything with that? You might throw things in the dark and try to make something really great, but the reality is, what you're interpreting isn't necessarily going to be what they were thinking in the first place, just like that slide we saw before. So by defining the roles of your team, we have actual people who can ask those questions. The front-end designer can say, hey, this is great, awesome. Usually we would do this with SAS, and usually we do this with HTML5. Are these the type of requirements that'll make sense for this type of project? The next thing we look at is defining what is to be expected of each role. And that's what I was just talking about there, too. Really setting those expectations so no one's out of the loop as far as what they need to be doing. Defining how the work gets done. How do things get complete? When you complete it, where does it go? Who gets notified? Who's told about this in the first place? I won't guarantee. How many folks use something like Basecamp? No? Oh, okay. Or maybe just issue tracker and like GitHub or something, or Jira, okay. And other project management software like that. The reality is that normally we'll put in and we'll say, hey, I finished up this task, I did this thing, and we write it out and send it away, and it goes into the ether, just somewhere out there. Just somewhere out there. And we expect other folks to kind of be mind readers to know that this was completed, this was done. But the reality is that often at times, the client we're working with or the manager we're working with doesn't necessarily understand the same tools and the same vernacular that we do. So we have to actually educate them. We have to be able to say, how does this work get done? Where do we put it? How do we notify people? It's also going to develop a work ethic by having a process. So the great thing is, how good do you feel when you accomplish and squash a really nasty bug. Not a real bug. I mean, I mean a bug, in your code. Or how great do you feel when you launch that site and everyone's excited and you go out for beers afterwards? Like, this is the kind of thing I'm talking about. It actually helps you develop a work ethic. It increases morale. Same thing I was just talking about there. And also helps establish a culture, believe it or not. Culture is one of those terrible buzzwords now. It really is. We went out to dinner with a few folks last night, and culture is almost like you don't want to say it because it feels like so startup-y and stuff like that. But it's true. You're defining the culture. You're defining the expectations and kind of like, the housing for how people should act in the office, how people should act on your team. I shouldn't say in the office. I mean, this goes for folks that are telecommuting, too, that are distributed teams. Same stuff. And it keeps you dry. You guys got to know what I mean. I don't mean not wet. I mean, don't repeat yourself. That's that consistency. It's making sure that you have these things in place so you're not constantly starting from scratch every time you need to do a new project or every time you need to send an email to the client to update them on something. How many folks use email templates when you're sending something to the client? Okay, you're going to start doing it. I mean, it's things like that we just need to be able to put into a process so that we can do them over and over again. So don't worry, though. I just brought the house down. I can feel the gloom. I can feel the sadness. The reality is this has already been accomplished before, and by folks much smarter than us. This has happened in the medical profession, and this is the honest-to-God truth. So at the turn of the 20th century, medicine was having a terrible, terrible time at killing people. Literally just, infections, leaving surgery equipment inside of people, forgetting to, wash hands before doing surgery, all kinds of things like that. And the medical profession tried all these big things. If you go back and look up on the internet, you'll find all these crazy inventions that were created so that the environments could be more sterile and stuff like that. And it ended up being that the only thing that they really needed to do was create a checklist. That was it. It was that people were going in, nurses and doctors were going into surgery and just, blindly going in and say, okay, I know I got to take out the appendix, and it's over here, and I'll take it out and, wrap it up. We're all good. Let's go. But they weren't going through a process to realize, I need to disinfect the area. I need to make sure we shave, the hair off of there first. We need to make sure that we sew the patient back up. All those types of things as well. So we can actually learn from that. So where do we start? Well, the first place I would say to start would be by designating a process leader. That's going to be the person who's kind of like your champion, your steward of the process. This is the person that will read a project management book on their own because they want to. This is the, I mean, really, this is the person that, loves things like, loves knowing about agile methodology or loves working with things like Trello or Basecamp or, talking to the client, doing all those types of things. That's who your process leader should be. That might be you. That might not be you. You might be a solo shop and you don't like doing this. So find someone who's going to do it with you. For me, it's this guy. This is Clay. Clay Walter, he's my director of production. He is he's like the imam and the enforcer of the process at Digital Empire. So he's setting the tone for what we need to have in our actual process documentation. He's also enforcing it on projects, saying like, hey, we really don't comment on our code like that. You should do it this way. He's also encouraging people. If we mess up, if we forget something, I forget something all the time. I'm the worst. So if we forget something in, somewhere in the process of what we're supposed to be doing, gently taking you aside and saying, this is great. I'm glad you got it done on time. But we do need to look at the process stuff to make sure this stuff all happens down the line. And not trying to be like, weird office space about it. Like, where's your TPS report? But showing like why that stuff's important, because it all trickles down the line. There's certain reasons that we do different things. So define a person, figure out who that is. The second thing you could do is define what you know. And this is really simple. This is something that you should think about doing this afternoon. After this talk, skip the next talk. Go sit down and define what you know. And really, all I'm talking about is a bulleted list. What are the things that you know right now? You might know when we launch a site, we go through these 7 steps. Or you might know that when we code something, we usually use grunt or gulp. And if we do that, then we're usually running it on our Macs or whatever. Defining those things that you do know now. What are the parts of the process that you're already doing that you want to be able to replicate? After you do that, and this is a huge brain dump. I mean, you're going to have a lot of stuff. After you do that, define what you do not know. What are the things that are making your stomach upset? Literally, what are the things that are making the heat stand on the back of your neck because you just don't know the answers? What are those things that keep coming up? Maybe someone's asking you to do something in the process that you're just not familiar with. What are those things? Define them so you can tackle them. And if you can't tackle them, you can find someone like a Clay that can help be able to tackle those. So what processes should you define? Well, I know most of us are here because we're web designers, developers, designers. But really, there's a lot of different processes we should think about. One is the production process. So that's the actual, producing our code, producing our work. We should absolutely define that. What are the tools we use? How are we keeping version tracking? How are we doing that stuff? How are we doing a staging environment? How are we doing, our local dev environments? Those types of things. And a great thing, I can't remember if I say this later, but I'll say it now. Don't be a stickler, though, on telling people what they should use. Like, don't literally sit someone down and be like, you should use Sublime Text to edit. That's not what we're talking about. We're saying just say, hey, you should use a text editor other than Microsoft Word. Just putting it out there. The creative process, same thing. So in here, we're defining, okay, so what kind of files are we going to be working with? Are we going to be working with Photoshop documents? Are we instead going to be working with Sketch documents? Are we going all vector for everything that we're trying to do? Also for the creative process, what are the steps for us to actually come up with an idea? Are we starting with, business model generation? Are we actually sitting down with the client, looking at their problems, finding solutions to that, and putting it with actual cash, figuring out how they're going to make money from what they're doing? Or is it more that we're looking at a problem, a design problem, and solving a solution to that through wireframes, site mapping, boards, things like that? The technology process. So the tech behind everything. So, what kind of machines are we running this on? What's the security levels that we're running? Do we have a VPN that we're signing into to communicate with each other and stuff like that? Client services process, so how are we actually going to communicate with the client? Who's going to deal with that type of thing? And the reason I still show these to you, even though most of us are focused more on design and dev, is that these are things you're going to have to eventually know. You're going to have to eventually embrace them. You might not like talking to the client, but eventually you're going to have to know who's doing that and what the process is. Because the more you can understand about that, like why the sales guy promises everything to the client when you're in the meeting, the easier it is for you to be able to say, okay, these things we can do, these things we can't do, and how those things become overages and generates more revenue for what you're doing. The client services process, the other thing to note too, is that this type of person who's usually in charge of the client service process is someone that's going to be more outgoing. So don't be worried if they're very dominant on what their process is for client services. It's just one of those things where salespeople, client service folks are just a little bit more, what's the word? Energetic, aggressive maybe? I don't know. Out in the open. Leadership and management process. So this as well. Literally talking about, so how do we evolve as staff members? Where does the leader step in to guide us on things? What are the things that a leader should be doing for us? One thing we just started implementing at Digital Empire, we're a team of 6. So we're small, and we're looking to evolve. That's the whole point of all this stuff. And one thing we just started implementing was a weekly check-in, an actual sit-down with each employee. We would just sit down literally for 10, 15 minutes over a cup of coffee. I can do that now. That's possible. But the actual process documents we put together to talk about this says that their manager or their leader is going to be the one who actually sits down with them to do this. So we know as we evolve, and I'm not able to sit down with every single employee every week, then maybe I'll do that once a month. And maybe their manager directly to them will do that every single week. Human resources, you should also be documenting that. Just fly by. There's things like insurance, salaries, how salaries are actually made. Anyone seen the Buffer salary blog post? Oh, you gotta check it out. So Buffer, I wish I linked it to it here. Buffer, the social media app that lets you schedule social media for later, they're very transparent about themselves. And they actually have a whole blog post written up about their salaries. And their salaries take into consideration like where the person lives, so how much they're actually getting as opposed to the economic environment of that they're in. It doesn't really teeter more on seniority, it's more on achievements and things like that. And they really spell it out. It's a great blog post to check out. It's Buffer. The marketing process also. So how are you marketing what you do? As a company, as a department maybe, how are you letting people know what you're achieving? How are you letting people know what it is that you're capable of also if you're not currently achieving certain things? New business and sales process, very close to client services, but this is more along the lines of what's the actual process we use to get a new customer, to get a new client. They click on a link from Google AdWords, then they come to our website, then they see a white paper, then they download the white paper, then we contact them about something else, like that type of thing, like defining what that process is. And the finance process. And in that, literally saying, like, how are we generating a revenue? How's everyone getting paid? We aren't called, web artists here. I mean, there are web artists, but that's not us. You're getting paid for this. This is a job. So how do the finances come into play? All right. So that's a lot of stuff. I'm going to show you a couple things that we definitely can do that'll help move this along for you. First thing we're going to do is plan the process. So documenting everything that you can. So it goes back to that checklist we were talking about, like literally documenting all these things, writing these things down so that you can go back and edit them later. Don't worry about editing them as you're putting them together. You don't want to censor yourself. You don't want to keep yourself from coming up with ideas and also just knowing what it is that you have to be responsible for in the long run. Write it all in a wiki or a document or something like that. Even Google Docs, whatever. This is an example of something we put together. So this is just about, what is this? This is the 4 steps to putting together, actually there's 7 steps, to migrating content for a client. So we're looking at, we got a website redesign for a client, how do we move over their content from their old site? Presuming that it's not the same content management system and stuff like that. This is really just going through that, literally spelling it out for everyone. You'll notice that one of the first links there references another document we've created, so employees can go over there and see that document to get more information about something else there. We're linking out to actual sites and things like that, so we're spelling it out so that if anyone was to come in here, and God forbid, I'm no longer living tomorrow, they could come in and know exactly how to go through and import content without me sitting down with them to understand that. So before I go on, one of the barriers I usually hear, and this is over and over again, is people are just asking like, well, I don't know where to start. I don't know where to put this. We use 5 different tools. Just put it somewhere. It doesn't matter where you put it. Here's some great examples. Just throw it into Google Apps. That's probably the simplest thing if you're already using it. If you want to, spin up a media wiki. Those ones are free to download. It's open source, not a big deal. It literally, you can go to somewhere like DreamHost or DigitalOcean and spin it up super quick. WordPress, same thing. You can turn a WordPress into your own little engine, your little wiki or something. Or Golem, and I don't mean the guy. Golem, anyone use Golem? So Golem is GitHub's wiki. So the same markdown wiki that we use in GitHub, that's Golem. And it's open source. If you go to GitHub, you'll find it right on there. Just search for Golem, I swear. I'm not Rickrolling you. So another thing is to templatize these documents. If we started from scratch every time or copied the same types of documents over and over again, we're going to get the wrong stuff inside of these documents. So do yourself a favor and make yourself a template. This is our template for making a new document. Literally talking through, this isn't just lorem ipsum, it's talking through to the person that needs to make this document what you should be doing. Literally spelling it out again for them. This is what we found, actually, to be probably one of the best assets we have so far. That, I can literally, one of my guys can tell me, hey, you know what, we just moved from grunt to gulp. This is actually a real story. So we moved from grunt to gulp, so we're using gulp now for everything. I don't know gulp. I'm getting too old for this shit. But he was able to go through, look at this, make the document, and actually explain everything to all of us. So we could just go through later and say, oh, okay, I get it. So, what we used to do over here, instead of just running grunt, now I just run gulp. And literally spelling out for us. Define some tools, but give some freedom. And that's what I was talking about before. Just tell people they need to use a text editor, but don't necessarily have to spell it and say what exact one they need to use. One of the great things you can do is actually define, communication tools. I'm sure some of this you already fall into. You probably already use things like Gmail or Slack or whatever, and it's just natural because you and the team just say, okay, we'll use this now. But spell it out a little bit more. Give it a little bit of a dinner. Actually say what's going to happen, why it's happening, where these links are for people that are new to the team. Imagine as if you were just coming in on the first day and you need to get up to speed and understand what are all your Slack channels. Yeah, we all start out with a general and random and stuff like that, but why is there one called the Chicken Hub? Who knows? I don't know. But you got to spell it out so people know. Define checklists. And so this is beyond what we were talking about before, but this is more about define the checklists that you're going to want to be using on a regular basis. So a great example of this is sales process. So this is a sales process checklist that Sabrina and I use, one of my partners. And every time that a person contacts us from our website, it actually uses Zapier to create a new card on Trello, which is basically duplicating a card we already created and gives us this checklist that I've already created. So in other words, I'm not reinventing the wheel every time. So when someone literally contacts us about a lead that they want to work with us, it goes boom, makes this, assigns it to Sabrina automatically, and then she decides what happens next. But she has that whole checklist to follow. She knows what she needs to do first is follow up with an email, and then the next thing she needs to do is set up an initial phone call. That's it. Just defining these checklists right there for people to follow. And I know the other side to that is everyone says, well, yeah, I make checklists, but I lose them or I don't follow them. Can't help you. You just got to follow them. You got to keep doing it and keep up with it. Great places to do that. Basecamp can do checklists. Asana is another great one. Trello, of course. Big proponent of Trello. But even Bitbucket and GitHub. You can make task lists in there. Anyone ever made a task list in GitHub? Oh, okay, 2. It's just with Markdown in there. You're literally just doing little brackets and you got your own little task list for your code. Use video. That's another key thing. Why make it something so difficult that you can't be able to use it? Let me just bring up the video here. Which side do I got to go to? This side. There we go. This is a video that Clay made. So we kept asking, how do you do different stuff in Trello? So he decided to actually, give it a little bit of fun and start making videos for us. And you might notice he even clicked on this little thing from Chrome. That's our own little Chrome extension that we made that has all the links for everyone in the office. I don't know what the... Wait for it. And that's it. But what happens, right? Like, yeah, it's a quirky, crazy video. Like, it's kind of, nuts. But what happens? Then internally, we're all sharing it with each other. Like, oh my God, did you see the video Clay made? So now everyone's looked at the training video to see exactly how we're supposed to do that type of thing. And the last major thing is include the input of the whole team. Even though we've chosen that one person that's in charge of kind of the process, that one person who's spearheading everything, this has to be something that's with the whole team involved. We have to get their input. We have to hear what new things are happening. Like I was just saying with the grunt versus gulp thing. Like I never would have known that it was going to make it easier for us to do some of the different things that we do on a regular basis. So really relying and listening to the team is going to be a really important part of this as well. All right, so another big thing to do is share that process. So make sure that it's something that's not just, sits on Google Drive or sits in, your own little space with all your other documents in Dropbox or something. Make sure it's something that people can actually access from their phones, from the web, like wherever you need them to get to it. In this case, build an intranet. Not just a wiki, but an actual intranet that gets them all this information. Give them the links to everyday things that they'll be doing and stuff like that. Like I was saying in that video, we actually made a Chrome extension that shows a lot of this stuff. So we also went ahead and said, okay, let's just make an intranet. Like, let's actually show everyone where all this stuff is. So it's a little bit nicer. It's not like going through Google Apps docs, but guess what? These are Google Docs originally that we wrote over there and then brought over. So just brought them into WordPress basically for this one. Build a client portal. And I hate the word portal because that's another it's like millennium buzzword, portal. But it's true. Build a client portal. So a place where the clients can actually go into and get information on how the project's going to run. How many people, other than just running through a process of we're going to start with discovery, we're going to do design, we're going to do development, how many people have actually sat down with a client and explained individual items for every single deliverable that comes to them? Yeah? A few. All right. This gives you the opportunity to do that. Yes, we use things like Basecamp and people say what their design meant and But what I'm talking about is go a little bit beyond that even. So actually showing them what are the objectives to the specific project? How is whatever we're delivering to you right now going to actually equate to what you need to do, what you need to have. This is a status report example. So when we're giving this to someone, they're literally getting the links, all the things that they would need to be able to understand how how it is what we delivered to them. This also shows our team. How many times does the client actually know what people look like on your team? Having met them and stuff like that. So we switch it up. So for every client, actually say who the people are in that team. So this is the team specific to that client. They have their own username and password to log into the site. Every client gets their own site. I mean, come on, it's like $5 to spin it up in, different places. And the big thing that happens then is what happens in the client's eyes? You're like a god. You're the champion because you're helping them. You're showing them things that no other studio, no other developer, no other design shop has ever done for them. You're going above and beyond rather than just saying, here's your app, here's your design. Have a new member orientation process. it's really important. I understand that when we think of orientation processes, we think of things like starting a job at Best Buy or McDonald's. But the reality is, by having an orientation process, you can get folks on board and up to speed much quicker than if they're just kind of blindly learning how things work in your department or at your studio. So again, spelling those things out. On this, we're just really relinking the things that we've already set. We have already set what our core values are. We've already said what our rules and expectations are. We've already set what the vacation and sick days are. These are just linking to other places, so when that new member comes in, they can get up to speed much quicker. And they can keep referring back to it, too. All right, so the last part here is to evolve the process. So once we have some of these documents in place, once you have like your own little intranet, your own little client hub, how do we actually evolve this? How do we take it to the next level? One big thing is editing. So I know before I said don't edit. Now would be the point when you start editing these things. Putting in only the information that you really need to have there. Being succinct and being clear is going to be your biggest friend. Giant paragraphs of text that make no sense, your enemy. So you want to be very clear on what the things are that people need to do, what the things are that need to be in this process. Don't worry about the naysayers, but listen to the moans and groans. What I mean is don't listen to that person who just always tells you, process sucks, I hate this stuff. Like, that's not helpful. But do listen to the person that says, this just took me 3 hours, and I know that I could do it this other way in 5 minutes. Listen to them, because they have the knowledge, they have something that you didn't realize before. Review it every 6 months, so as you have that process, keep reviewing it. It's not something that you're gonna create and put on a shelf and just have it over there. Actually, keep reviewing it. Keep looking at it and trying to understand what things need to be edited, what needs to evolve. And then every 5 years, throw it out. Get rid of it and start over. This is actually the words from Rick Webb, my old boss at Barbarian Group. And the reason for that is that how many people remember what they were doing 5 years ago? Coding, designing. Is it anything like what you're doing now? Anything? Probably not. Because the reality is our technology, our processes change so rapidly. So it doesn't mean to get rid of everything and not think about it anymore. It means start over. Just know the things that you had before and now redo it all. Fresh slate, start the whole process again to actually evolve a new one together. Now go do it. Like I said, skip the next presentation, not a big deal. What you can do is something like this guy. This is Dat Fan. He's a comedian. This is actually a joke. He was on this show in America called Last Comic Standing. And Last Comic Standing, the premise is they all lived in a house, and that's how it used to be. They all lived in a house, and they're amateur comedians, and they're looking to get like a large contract to have like a sitcom or something like that. Dat Fan was funny, but he was not the funniest person. And if you ever saw that first season of Last Comic Standing, you'll most likely agree with that. But what he did was that he looked at what kept working and what wasn't working and kept evolving his script over and over again. Whereas all the other contestants just had their material and just kind of went by the seat of their pants and stuff like that, he started devising formulas. He started saying, if it's this kind of crowd, if I see 2/3 women, I'm going to do these jokes. If I see 2/3 men, I'll do these jokes. And he started evolving it, and what was happening was he started winning, and he actually won the whole thing. He won the whole season, all because he started thinking of comedy more as a formula. And it was funny because the other contestants are like making fun of him. He's got like little playbooks, and they're like, look at this guy with his formulas and his charts and his graphs. But the reality is, that's what we need to do. We need to actually be very strict on ourselves and say, hey, what things are working for us, what things are not, and just being sober about it, being right up front. 3 great books that I would suggest you need to own, no matter what. The Checklist Manifesto, and by the way, you can get these on Kindle. And all 3 of them are actually also Audible books. So you can just listen to them if you want to, if you don't like reading. So the Checklist Manifesto is the first one. The E-Myth, which is actually a book that's been around for, I think, maybe even 30 years or something. Checklist Manifesto has the example of like the medical profession and using checklists to really evolve your department and your business. The E-Myth is about the entrepreneur myth, that we just have this like amazing gift to be entrepreneurs all of a sudden, and people like Donald Trump. Well, Donald Trump's not a good example, but rise to success overnight. But the reality is, the E-Myth talks more about defining a repeatable process. Doing dry, making something that can be repeated without you being involved. And the last one there, Scrum, the art of doing twice the work in half the time. If you haven't already adopted agile methodologies, even if you have, this is a great book to read. It's written very well. It's written as if you're just like in a room talking to Jeff Sutherland. And so what actually, with these 3 books, what you actually have is a real kind of foundation to keep doing this process over and over again. And these are things that I'll keep relating back to and keep looking at as we kind of evolve. That's it, everybody. That's the process. Thank you. There's if you want to learn more about process, I'm doing a special spotlight on it with FITC in I think it's like the first week of October. I think it's like October 2nd and 3rd maybe, or 2nd. It's a Saturday. So it'll be a day-long thing, and it's here in Toronto. I can't exactly remember where. I think it's the working group or something. But it'll be good. A full-day process, about 50 people or something. I think we're like 2/3 full so far, so 50% discount if you want it. Feel free to email me or talk to me on Twitter. Do we have time for questions, or are we maxed? 2 minutes? You got any questions? Did I scare you? Yeah.
How do you go about maintaining this? You're a polished company, and this is like pretty robust considering your size, but obviously your mind is to grow. But
yeah.
How do you maintain this? I guess you have a person that is dedicated to that.
Yes and no. I mean, it's sharing the load. You saw the bald spot when I came in, didn't you? It's stress. It's stress. But the reality is, it is stressful keeping up with the stuff. But it's more so what we've found is when the emergencies arise, and that's when there's problems in the process, when there's like the, oh shit, something's on fire, that's when you actually should be documenting it the most. And it's kind of like one of those things of like, I don't like going to the gym. I know I got to go to the gym. I know I need it the most because I got to lose weight and do these things. It's the same type of thing with that. Like, you have to do it. If you're going to evolve and keep going, you just got to make the time, literally in that crisis, to document what's going on.
I guess also, what made you do it so early in this company? Was it past experience?
Oh, yeah, past experience, yeah. Yeah, being in places where you're 150 people and literally, no one knows what they're doing, and, you got large contracts coming through the door, and there's a loose process set up, but nothing that's really defined, across the whole company. Yep. Yep. Oh, yeah, for sure. We got, a good example is actually Slack. So we use Slack for everything now, for all our communication internally. We just started letting clients into a couple channels, stuff like that. But we had the largest resistance, actually, from Clay, the guy who's in charge of the process. But what it took was just showing the benefits, like why this was going to work, why this made sense. And usually what you'll find, and I swear to God this is true, usually you'll find when you have resistance from someone about something with a process, it's because of a few reasons. One is they don't want to change what they know. They don't want to evolve. And I don't mean evolve like you should evolve, but we get used to our stuff, and I don't have the time to learn that shit. I don't want to do that. That'll be a reason. Or another big reason is that they have some fear that this is going to replace something that makes them beneficial, makes them important to the team and to what's going on. But the reality is, every time I've seen that happen, we really kind of try to show the person this is not about them. This is about whatever that thing is, and it's going to make it easier for you and us and everybody. If you're trying to do something now that isn't going to make it easier for everyone and just make it more painful, then I'd rethink what you're trying to do. Yeah. Yep.
How
Yeah. So we were using the WordPress site. That's what I was showing you there. Right now, and that keeps revisions inside of WordPress. So we installed actually this little plugin from, it's called WPMU, which is like a WordPress multi-user site. And they have this plugin to run your own wiki, basically, through WordPress. So that shows revisions right up front to anyone who's logged in, so they could see that things were updated. And then literally, someone on the team will say, hey, I updated this process document. Updated, the HR document. Like, you need to take a look. These 3 things have changed, if they're really important or whatever. But yeah, literally telling people. Yep. One more. Yeah, I think for that one, yeah, we are. We aren't, and we actually just redid it, so we're not now. Now we're using, I can't remember, it was something with Node. I don't remember what it was, but yeah. All right, guys, I got 0 minutes. I love you. I'll see you. If you have any questions, feel free to tackle me.